as you can tell, there's a lot more artworks behind me than what you are used to. Basically, I've updated my fan art wall because, as you can tell by the amount of it, it was highly needed. I really needed to upgrade it because holy shit, I have so many fan art. I'm very thankful for it. I'm going to be leaving a bonus video on my channel where I show the process of me hanging it all up, and also a more detailed view of all of the artworks that are visible right now. I will not be able to show every artwork in every video, so that's why. But yeah, I think it's a really great update and I'm very happy with it. Let's get on to the video. Hi guys, welcome back to my Therian territory. You may call me Thorn, and in today's video I want to talk about theories and integrations within theanthropy and why the sublabels just aren't that important. At the moment I am witnessing an influx within the community of spiritual Therians, or even Therians who believe that theanthropy is inherently a spiritual thing. Of course though, if you've done some research about theanthropy, you'll know that it is not inherently a spiritual thing, and it can also be something psychological or anything alike. Whether you call yourself a spiritual or psychological Therian purely depends on where you believe your theanthropy comes from. So basically the theory behind your theanthropy, and this is an individualistic thing because everyone has their own theories about their own theanthropy and should be able to respect other people's theories. So while it's perfectly possible to have one theory about all Therians out there, like a universal theory that you believe, that's totally fine. However, you still kind of have to respect every other theory out there because you can't really claim for someone to be spiritual when they are not spiritual, for example. What I'm noticing is that a lot of Therians tend to tie a lot of value to the idea of being a spiritual or psychological Therian. As you can tell, it doesn't necessarily have to be very important because it's basically only about the theory and it's not really about your experience for that matter. And this is actually not the first time this is happening, because within the history of the Therian community, there used to be a time where theanthropy was seen as a spiritual thing only. However, over time the Therian community has learned that theanthropy can be seen as different for everybody, and therefore when someone experiences psychological theanthropy, that's totally fine, and it is all just the same experience in the end. And by saying that spiritual or psychological theanthropy is not that important, I don't necessarily mean that for every Therian individual the spiritual aspect or the psychological aspect of the theanthropy is not that important, because it can surely be important to them. However, what I'm trying to say is that in the general community, whether you are a spiritual or psychological Therian is not really something that you have to dig in to know what you are, for example. It's not really a label that you are supposed to have. I've actually caught myself doing this at the beginning of my stay within the community. I really tried to find out for myself whether I was a spiritual or a psychological Therian. I've even made a video about it at some point where I perfectly described what my theories were behind my theanthropy and classified them as either spiritual or psychological. But I have to be honest, my personal theory behind my theanthropy keeps kind of fluctuating. I have moments in my theanthropy journey where I kind of feel like it's suddenly spiritual, and at other moments I barely feel spiritual connection, and therefore I do kind of feel like it's a psychological thing. And because it fluctuates like this for me, I've kind of concluded for myself that I don't really care whether I'm a spiritual or psychological Therian. So the theory behind my theanthropy doesn't really matter. The experience is what is important. The experience is what is interesting to look into. Surely every once in a while I can kind of take a look at, okay, but where do I actually feel like this is coming from? But does it necessarily mean that I have to call myself a spiritual or a psychological Therian? Not at all. And I've witnessed that my personal mindset as well as the mindset of the community has also kind of been evolving when it comes to the terms of suntherian, contherian. These are all terms to describe the level of integration of your animal self within your personal life as a human. For a long time, the terms suntherian, contherian, and Velican theanthropy has been kind of a thing within the community to describe that level of integration. At first, it was kind of seen as like a rare thing, because if you were like a normal Therian, so to speak, you'd just be experiencing human behavior throughout your day, and then sometimes there'd be like highlighted moments where you'd suddenly feel more animal, also called a shift, for example. But then there are Therians out there who kind of felt like their animal selves was always kind of integrated into their own personality and into their own selves, and it didn't really have any highlights, it just stayed the same throughout. For some this could fluctuate, for some this would be very nested within one type of shift, for example. Back then that was seen as rare, but as we have noticed within the community, this is actually something that occurs quite often. A lot of Therians feel this way. A lot of Therians feel as if their animal selves is simply integrated into their personality. So how you experience your theanthropy and the level of integration is kind of a spectrum, so to speak. Where you are placed within that spectrum really depends per person. Therefore, giving it sublabels is actually not that important. It's way more important to simply describe what you experience rather than giving yourself a label for it. And I'm not saying you're not allowed to call yourself a suntherian or a contherian or even a psychological or spiritual therian. However, I have been kind of noticing that the labels are kind of starting to water down when it comes to the value behind it. And for the terms suntherian and contherian, this is especially important because till this day, there is still debate about what exactly the difference is between suntherianthropy and contherianthropy. And why is this? Because one person simply happened to describe their level of integration of their theanthropy and gave it a label. They decided to call it contherianthropy. And then there was someone else who also described what their kind of integration was within their theanthropy, and they called it suntherianthropy. And suddenly people saw these labels as something that you could claim for yourself. However, there's so many factors within the spectrum that it's basically impossible to actually give it a label or claim a label as something that fully describes your theanthropy or your level of integration. The community is starting to notice that theanthropy is a unique experience for everyone, and how to describe their experience is what is important. It's not necessarily about the labels that you give yourself. Now, I do want to give kind of a nuance to the statements, which is the fact that there are still labels out there within the Therian identity that can be very useful to describe your theanthropy, but this is usually more about your identity itself rather than your level of integration, etc. Great examples of these are paleotheanthropy, clodotheanthropy, being theriomythic, etc, etc. Paleotheanthropy specifically describes that you identify as an animal that has gone extinct. This is a really great indicator because if you tell someone that you are a paleotherian, that says a lot about you, that says a lot about your Therian experience, and therefore it is worth mentioning. I was also once that person who would be looking at the suntherian label and the contherian label, and while I knew that my animal self would be integrated into my personality in some way, I had no idea what to call myself. I'd be looking for these labels and I'd be thinking like, okay, but what is I? You know, I didn't understand what the differences were. I didn't understand what I would be calling myself, and I even thought for a while that I would be a suntherian, but even then I would just kind of feel like, okay, what am I to do with this label, you know? But now I can simply tell you guys that I personally view my theanthropy as my animal self and my human self being sort of mixed into one another. Call it through a soul or personality-wise, etc. Does that make me a suntherian or a contherian or whatever? I don't know, and I don't care. I just know how to explain my Therian experience. And if I tell someone this, it's clear. It's obvious what I'm experiencing. I'm a mixture of human and animal. That's how I view myself. I'm actually very curious to know what you guys think about this statement of these kind of sublabels not being very important and the experience of theanthropy being more important to explain rather than the labels. I feel like explaining your experience rather than your labels is way more important and way more interesting to listen to as well. I would personally love to know how you guys look at the statement and how you guys view your level of integration within your theanthropy as well as your personal theory behind your theanthropy. And I'm not here to say that something has to change within the community, I'm just saying that I'm noticing a change. I hope you guys liked this video. If you did, please leave a like down below or maybe comment down below. Or if you have any critique, you can also comment down below, of course. And if you really like my videos and want to see more in the future, perhaps consider to subscribe. And I'll be seeing you guys in my Therian territory in the next video. Bye.